I need $3,000 by Friday, or they're discontinuing her treatment. Lucinda's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the glow from her laptop casting shadows across her studio apartment. Marcus's voice crackled through her headphones, distant and tinny. Lucy, I told you I can't. I know what you told me. She pulled up another job listing on the dark web forum she'd been scouring for the past 4 hours. I'm not asking you for money. I'm asking if you know anyone hiring. A pause. Then Marcus sighed. There's something. But it's not clean. Nothing I do is clean. This is different. No questions asked type of work. You'd be decrypting a drive for someone who doesn't want their name attached to anything. Lucinda's stomach tightened. She'd done gray area work before, helping people recover data from corrupted systems, bypassing security on their own devices when they'd forgotten passwords. But Marcus's tone suggested this crossed several more lines. How much? 5,000. Half up front. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. The hospital bed. The machines. The doctor's carefully neutral expression when he'd explained that without continued treatment, they were looking at months, not years. Send me the details. 48 hours later, Lucinda sat in a coffee shop 3 neighborhoods away from her apartment, a USB drive burning a hole in her pocket. The pickup had been quick and anonymous, an envelope taped under a bench in Prospect Park, exactly where the encrypted message had said it would be. The drive itself was professional grade, the kind that wiped itself after too many failed password attempts. She'd spent the past day cracking through its security layers in a virtual sandbox, careful not to trigger any of its fail-safes. Now, with the final encryption broken, she plugged it into her air-gapped laptop and watched the files populate. Her blood went cold. The spreadsheet that opened wasn't just data. It was a ledger. Names, amounts, dates. Transactions that could only mean one thing. And the sums, she'd never seen numbers like that outside of corporate balance sheets. Lucinda's hands shook as she scrolled. She needed to copy the contents and return the drive. That was the job. Simple. Except her finger slipped. She watched in horror as the command executed. Not copy. Delete. And not just delete, a military-grade wipe that overwrote every sector of the drive 7 times over. No. No, no, no. She tried to stop it, but the progress bar marched forward with mechanical indifference. 30 seconds later, the drive was blank. Completely, irreversibly blank. Lucinda's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd seen enough of the ledger to understand what she'd just done. This wasn't some small-time operation. The names she'd glimpsed, the amounts, the meticulous record-keeping, this was organized crime. And she'd just erased their books. She unplugged the drive with trembling hands. Maybe they wouldn't know it was her. The job had been anonymous. No names, no faces. But even as she thought it, she knew better. People who operated at this level didn't leave loose ends. And she was about to become the loosest end of all. Lucinda made it 3 days. 3 days of jumping at every sound, of taking different routes home, of sleeping with her phone clutched in her hand. 3 days of telling herself that maybe, somehow, it would be fine. On the 4th day, she came home to find her apartment door already open. The man sitting in her desk chair was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp features and eyes that tracked her movement with predatory precision. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent, and he held her laptop open on his knee like he owned it. 2 other men flanked the door. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Miss Williams. His English was accented but flawless, each word precisely measured. My name is Kang-Dae. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Lucinda's mouth went dry. She thought about running, but the men at the door eliminated that option. I don't know what you're talking about. The drive. He set her laptop aside and stood, moving with an economy of motion that suggested violence held carefully in check. You were hired to decrypt it. Instead, you destroyed 5 years of records. That was an accident. Accidents have consequences. He stepped closer, and Lucinda forced herself not to back away. Those records represented $60 million in transactions. Names, amounts, schedules. All gone. $60 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. I can pay you back. The words came out desperate, stupid. I just need time. You make $43,000 a year, Miss Williams. You have $1,600 in your checking account and a maxed-out credit card. Your mother's medical bills alone will bankrupt you in 6 months. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a specimen under glass. So no, you cannot pay me back. The casual invasion of her privacy should have terrified her. Instead, Lucinda felt a spark of anger cut through the fear. Then what do you want? I want my ledger restored. Since that's impossible, I want the next best thing. Kang-Dae pulled a phone from his pocket and brought up a photo. This is Min Jae-sung. He's hosting a gala on Saturday. You're going to attend as my companion and help me access his personal server. Lucinda stared at the image. An older Korean man, distinguished, smiling for the camera. I'm not a thief. No. You're a cybersecurity expert who just destroyed $60 million of my property. Consider this your repayment plan. He swiped to another photo, blueprints, network diagrams. Jae-sung has information I need. Information he keeps on an isolated system in his office. You'll bypass his security while I keep him occupied. And if I refuse? Kang-Dae's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Your mother is at Mount Sinai, room 437. She has a nurse named Patricia who checks on her every 2 hours. On Wednesdays, your sister takes the train from Philadelphia to visit. He paused. I don't make threats, Miss Williams. I simply ensure compliance. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a sick, hollow feeling. You're threatening my family. I'm explaining your situation. Do this job, and we discuss how you'll work off the remainder of your debt. Refuse, and I find other ways to recoup my losses. He held out his phone. You have until tomorrow morning to study these plans. I'll collect you at 6 on Saturday. Lucinda took the phone with numb fingers. The man at her door stepped aside, and Kang-Dae walked past her without a backward glance. One more thing, he said from the doorway. The gala is black tie. Wear something appropriate. You're meant to be my partner, not my employee. Then he was gone, and Lucinda was alone in her apartment with a phone full of stolen blueprints and the crushing weight of her own mistake. She spent the next 2 days memorizing every detail of Jae-sung's security system. The network architecture was sophisticated, multiple redundancies, isolated servers, biometric locks. Whoever had designed it knew what they were doing. But every system had vulnerabilities, and Lucinda was very good at finding them. On Saturday evening, Kang-Dae's car arrived exactly at 6. A sleek black sedan with windows tinted dark enough to be illegal. The driver didn't speak, just held the door open while Lucinda climbed into the back seat. Kang-Dae was already there, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. His tuxedo was immaculate, his hair styled back from his face, and when he turned to assess her, Lucinda felt suddenly self-conscious in the dress she'd borrowed from her roommate. That won't work, he said flatly. It's all I have. He made a call, spoke rapid Korean, then ended it. We're making a stop. 20 minutes later, Lucinda found herself in a boutique that definitely didn't display prices in the window. A woman emerged with an armful of dresses in deep jewel tones, each one probably worth more than Lucinda's car. Try these, Kang-Dae said, settling into a chair like he planned to wait. I can dress myself. Clearly not well enough for tonight. He gestured to the changing room. We don't have time to argue. Lucinda bit back a retort and grabbed the dresses. In the privacy of the changing room, she let herself breathe. The fabric was buttersoft under her fingers, the kind of quality she'd never be able to afford. She tried on a deep emerald first, then a midnight blue. The burgundy dress fit like it had been made for her. The neckline was elegant without being revealing, the cut structured enough to look expensive. When she emerged, Kang-Dae looked up from his phone. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Better. The boutique owner appeared with shoes and a clutch. Kang-Dae paid without asking the price, and then they were back in the car, heading toward Manhattan. The floor plans showed Jae-sung's office on the 3rd floor, Lucinda said, trying to focus on the job instead of how aware she was of Kang-Dae's presence beside her. But his server room is in the basement. I'll need at least 20 minutes to bypass the security. You'll have 15. After that, people will notice we're missing. I need 20. He turned to look at her, and Lucinda met his gaze without flinching. After a moment, he nodded. 20. But not a second more. The gala was exactly what she'd expected. Ostentatious wealth on display, powerful people making powerful connections. Lucinda felt the weight of eyes on her as they entered, though whether it was because of her dress or her skin or the fact that she was with Kang-Dae, she couldn't tell. Kang-Dae's hand found the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. The touch was light, professional, but it sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Smile, he murmured. You're meant to be enjoying yourself. I'm meant to be robbing someone. You're meant to be my companion who happens to be skilled at technology. There's a difference. He steered her toward a group of men in suits. Stay close. Let me do the talking. The next hour was a masterclass in social manipulation. Kang-Dae moved through the crowd with practiced ease, charming some guests, intimidating others, always keeping Lucinda at his side. She played her part, smiling when appropriate, saying little, and watching for their opportunity. When Jae-sung finally appeared, Lucinda recognized him immediately. He greeted Kang-Dae with the warmth of old acquaintances, though she caught the calculation in both men's eyes. And who is this? Jae-sung's gaze settled on Lucinda with undisguised curiosity. Lucinda Williams, Kang-Dae said smoothly. A colleague from the States. Charming. Jae-sung's smile didn't reach his eyes. You have excellent taste, Kang-Dae. The casual objectification made Lucinda's skin crawl, but Kang-Dae's hand tightened slightly on her back. A warning. She kept her expression neutral. If you'll excuse us, Kang-Dae said, I promised Lucinda a tour of your collection. She has an interest in art. It was the signal. Lucinda let Kang-Dae guide her away from the main ballroom, toward the corridor that led to the private offices. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They moved quickly once out of sight. Kang-Dae produced a key card stolen or copied. Lucinda didn't ask, and they slipped through a service door that led to the basement. The server room was exactly where the blueprints had indicated. Lucinda pulled out the tools she'd hidden in her clutch and got to work on the biometric lock. 12 minutes, Kang-Dae said behind her. I know. The lock clicked open. Inside, the servers hummed with cold precision. Lucinda connected her device and started the data extraction, her fingers flying across the interface. What exactly are we stealing? Communication logs. Jae-sung has been making promises to multiple parties. I need to know which promises he actually intends to keep. So, this is about business. Everything is about business, Miss Williams. The download reached 60%. Lucinda's shoulders tensed. Someone's accessing the system remotely. Kang-Dae moved closer, looking over her shoulder. Can they detect us? Not if I'm careful. She rerouted their connection through 3 proxy servers and held her breath. The remote access continued, oblivious to their presence. 90%. 100. Done. They were back in the ballroom within 18 minutes, Lucinda's heart still racing. Kang-Dae fetched her a glass of champagne, and she drank it too quickly, trying to calm her nerves. Well done, he said quietly. Before Lucinda could respond, Jae-sung reappeared with 2 other men. The look on his face made her blood run cold. Kang-Dae. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were hard. I'm afraid there's been a security alert. A minor glitch, I'm sure, but I'll need to ask all guests to remain while we investigate. Lucinda's hand tightened on her glass. Beside her, Kang-Dae's expression remained perfectly composed. Of course. We're happy to cooperate. The next 30 minutes were excruciating. Security personnel moved through the ballroom, checking credentials, asking questions. Lucinda forced herself to breathe normally, to look bored rather than terrified. When they finally reached her and Kang-Dae, the guard looked at her a beat too long. Miss Williams. How do you know Mr. Kang? We work together, she said, keeping her voice steady. What kind of work? Import and export, Kang-Dae interjected smoothly. Lucinda consults on logistics. The guard's eyes narrowed, but before he could press further, another security member approached and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and moved on. It wasn't until they were back in the car, blocks away from the gala, that Lucinda let herself shake. They knew, she said. They had to have known. They suspected. There's a difference. Kang-Dae pulled out a tablet and opened the files they'd stolen. His expression darkened as he read. What is it? Jae-sung has been selling information to the prosecutors. Names, locations, financial records. He looked up, and for the first time, Lucinda saw something like anger crack through his composed exterior. He's been preparing to eliminate his competition. Including you. Including me. The car pulled up to a high-rise in Tribeca. Kang-Dae gestured for her to follow, and Lucinda's exhaustion warred with her wariness. Where are we? Somewhere safe. Jae-sung will realize his system was breached within hours. You can't go home. I have to go home. My things, my mother. Your mother is being transferred to a private facility as we speak. Better care, better doctors. Consider it a down payment on your debt. He held the elevator door open. And your things are being collected now. You'll stay here until we determine how much damage control is needed. Lucinda wanted to argue, but the exhaustion won. She followed him into the elevator and up to a penthouse apartment that was all clean lines and expensive minimalism. There's a bedroom through there, Kang-Dae said, shrugging off his jacket. We leave at 6 tomorrow. Leave for where? Seoul. If Jae-sung is working with prosecutors here, I need to consolidate operations there. And you're coming with me. The hell I am. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. You destroyed my ledger. You owe me $60 million. Tonight proved you're useful. So yes, you're coming with me. We'll discuss the terms of your employment on the plane. I'm not your employee. No. You're my asset. And assets need to be protected. He moved closer, and Lucinda fought the urge to step back. I'm not giving you a choice, Miss Williams. But I am giving you a chance to survive this. I suggest you take it. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into another room and leaving Lucinda alone with the weight of her new reality. The flight to Seoul was 16 hours of tense silence, punctuated by Kang-Dae's phone calls in rapid Korean. Lucinda sat in the first-class seat that probably cost more than her monthly rent and tried not to think about how completely her life had derailed in the span of a week. Her mother was safe. That was what mattered. The facility Kang-Dae had arranged was legitimately one of the best in the country. Lucinda had called that morning, and her mother had sounded stronger than she had in months. But the price of that safety was sitting across from her, reviewing documents with the focused intensity of a predator calculating its next move. When we land, Kang-Dae said without looking up, you'll be introduced as my strategic consultant. You'll attend meetings, but you won't speak unless I indicate you should. I'm not good at playing silent. Then learn quickly. The people we're dealing with will be looking for any sign of weakness. He finally met her eyes. Your skin will already make you conspicuous. Don't compound it by being foolish. The casual acknowledgement stung more than it should have. You're the one who decided to bring me. Because you're useful. Don't make me regret that decision. They landed at Incheon in the early morning, the sky gray with pre-dawn light. A car was waiting, and they drove into the city as it woke around them. Seoul was sprawling and modern, all glass towers and endless motion. Lucinda pressed her face to the window, watching the streets blur past. The apartment Kang-Dae brought her to was in Gangnam, high enough that the city spread out below like a glittering circuit board. It was larger than his place in New York, but just as impersonal. Everything designed, nothing lived in. You'll stay in the guest room, he said, showing her a space that was bigger than her entire studio back home. There are clothes in the closet. If they don't fit, someone will bring alternatives. Lucinda opened the closet to find it full of expensive, conservative pieces in neutral colors. Like a uniform for someone playing a role. How long have you been planning this? Since the moment I realized what you'd done. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You're a problem, Miss Williams. But you're also an opportunity. I intend to make the most of both. The first meeting was that afternoon. Lucinda wore a charcoal pantsuit that fit her like a second skin and followed Kang-Dae into a restaurant that was clearly closed to the public. The men waiting at the table were older, harder, with eyes that assessed her like a threat. Kang-Dae spoke in Korean, his tone deferential but firm. Lucinda caught a few words, her name, the English term consultant, something that sounded like American specialist. The men's expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. One of them said something sharp, gesturing at her. Kang-Dae's response was quiet, but edged with warning. The man fell silent, though his displeasure was evident. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Lucinda sat still, hyper-aware of every glance, every muttered comment she couldn't understand. She'd known she would stand out, but the reality of it was more isolating than she'd anticipated. Afterward, in the car, she finally spoke. "What did he say about me?" "Which one?" "The one who looked like he wanted to spit at my feet." Kang-Dae was quiet for a moment. "He questioned why I would bring an outsider into our business. Especially an outsider who looks like you." "And what did you tell him?" "That you're under my protection. And that questioning my decisions is the same as questioning my authority." He glanced at her. "He won't bother you again." But the looks didn't stop. Over the next week, Lucinda accompanied Kang-Dae to meeting after meeting, always silent, always watched. Some people were merely curious. Others were openly contemptuous. She heard the whispers even when they tried to be discreet. The isolation was suffocating. In New York, she'd been anonymous but present, part of the city's chaotic fabric. Here, she was hyper-visible and completely alone. Kang-Dae noticed, though he said nothing directly. Instead, he started explaining things. The relationships between different factions. The history of territories and betrayals. The careful balance he was trying to maintain. Jae-sung's cooperation with prosecutors has destabilized everything, he said one evening in the apartment. They'd fallen into a routine of debriefing after meetings, Lucinda curled in an armchair while Kang-Dae paced. People are afraid. Fear makes them stupid. Or dangerous. Often both. He poured himself a drink and offered her one. Lucinda accepted, needing something to do with her hands. "Tomorrow we meet with Park Se-jin. He controls the Northern Territories. If I can secure his support, others will follow. And if you can't, then we'll have a problem." The meeting with Park Se-jin was set for a hanok in Bukshin, one of the old traditional houses tucked between the modern city's towers. Lucinda expected another hostile reception, but Park surprised her. He was younger than Kang-Dae, maybe late 20s, with a sharp smile and curious eyes. When he looked at Lucinda, it wasn't with contempt, but with genuine interest. "An American consultant," he said in excellent English. "How modern of you, Kang-Dae. Miss Williams has unique skills." "I'm sure she does." Park gestured to the low table. "Please sit. Let's discuss business like civilized people." The conversation that followed was unlike the others. Park was direct, almost casual, as he laid out his concerns and conditions. Kang-Dae matched his tone, and for the first time, Lucinda saw him as something other than coldly controlled. There was a sharpness to his negotiating, a kind of chess player's anticipation that was almost exciting to watch. When Park mentioned a competitor who'd been using sophisticated encryption to hide his communications, Kang-Dae glanced at Lucinda. "How sophisticated?" she asked. Park raised an eyebrow. "She speaks." "Kang-Dae, you didn't mention she had a voice." "Only when it's useful." But there was something almost amused in Kang-Dae's tone. Lucinda ignored the byplay. "If you want those communications decrypted, I can do it. But I'll need access to the raw data in 3 days." Park studied her for a long moment. 2 days. Then you'll get partial results. 2.5 days. And Kang-Dae will owe me a favor. Kang-Dae nodded, and the deal was made. Back at the apartment, Lucinda set up her equipment and got to work. The encryption was military grade, the kind of challenge she would have enjoyed under different circumstances. Kang-Dae left her alone for the most part, checking in periodically with food and coffee. On the second evening, exhausted and frustrated, she made a mistake. A small one, but it triggered a cascade of failed attempts that locked her out of the system. Damn it. She slammed her hand on the desk. Problem? Kang-Dae appeared in the doorway. I'm locked out. I need to reset, but that means starting over from. She stopped. Why aren't you yelling at me? Would it help? No. Then I won't waste the energy. He moved closer, looking at her screen. How long to reset? For hours. Maybe 5. Then take a break. You've been at this for 14 hours straight. Lucinda wanted to argue, but her eyes were burning and her head felt full of cotton. She followed him into the living room, collapsing onto the couch while he ordered food. When it arrived, she barely tasted it, shoveling rice and meat into her mouth mechanically. Kang-Dae watched her with something that might have been amusement. You're very intense when you work. This is your deal on the line. It's also your skill being tested. I think you care about that more than you want to admit. He was right, which annoyed her. I don't like failing. I've noticed. He leaned back, regarding her. Why cybersecurity? The question caught her off guard. They didn't do personal. That wasn't their dynamic. I liked puzzles as a kid, she said finally. And I liked that computers didn't care what I looked like or where I came from. They just cared if I could solve the problem. But people care. People always care. Yes, Kang-Dae said quietly. They do. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared experience that Lucinda hadn't expected. Before she could examine it too closely, her timer went off. Time to reset. She cracked the encryption with 40 minutes to spare. Park Se-jin was impressed enough to solidify his alliance with Kang-Dae. Word spread, and the meetings that followed were subtly different. Lucinda was still an outsider, still conspicuous, but now she was an outsider with proven value. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like she was sinking deeper into a world she hadn't chosen and couldn't escape. 3 weeks into their stay, Kang-Dae announced they were attending a formal dinner hosted by one of his business partners. The kind of event where appearances mattered and alliances were forged over expensive food and careful conversation. You'll need something appropriate, he said. I have clothes. Not for this. He made a call, and an hour later, a stylist arrived with dresses that made the boutique pieces look casual by comparison. Lucinda tried on 5 before settling on a deep navy gown with delicate beading that caught the light. The stylist did her hair and makeup, transforming her into someone who might actually belong at such an event. When she emerged, Kang-Dae looked up from his phone. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Acceptable, she asked, hating how much she wanted his approval. More than acceptable. The dinner was held at a restaurant with a view of the Han River, all soft lighting and hushed elegance. Lucinda recognized some of the guests from previous meetings. Others were new faces, but the calculating looks were the same. Kang-Dae kept her close, his hand occasionally finding her elbow or the small of her back as he guided her through conversations. Each touch was brief, professional, but Lucinda found herself hyper-aware of them. Halfway through the evening, an older woman approached them. She was elegant in the way that came from generational wealth, and her eyes swept over Lucinda with open curiosity. Kang-Dae, you must introduce me to your companion. Mrs. Cho, this is Lucinda Williams. Lucinda, Mrs. Cho is one of Seoul's most influential art collectors. And gossips, Mrs. Cho said with a smile. I hear you're quite skilled with technology. I do my best. How modest. And how did you meet our Kang-Dae? The question was innocent on the surface, but Lucinda caught the calculation underneath. This was a test. Through work, she said carefully. He needed a specialist. I was available. How fortunate. Mrs. Cho's gaze slid to Kang-Dae. She's quite striking. I imagine she turns heads wherever you go. She does her job well, Kang-Dae said evenly. That's what matters. Something about his tone, the careful neutrality, the refusal to acknowledge anything beyond professional respect, stung more than Lucinda wanted to admit. She excused herself to find the restroom, needing space. But the restroom offered no refuge. 2 women were already there, speaking in Korean. They went silent when Lucinda entered, their expressions shifting to something guarded. She washed her hands in the loaded silence and left, her skin crawling with awareness. Back in the dining room, she found Kang-Dae in conversation with Park Se-jin. When he saw her, Park smiled. Miss Williams. I was just telling Kang-Dae that you've become quite the topic of conversation. Wonderful, Lucinda said flatly. Don't worry. Most of it is admiring. You've proven yourself useful. In our world, that's no small thing. He glanced at Kang-Dae. Though I imagine it's complicated, traveling with someone so conspicuous. I'm standing right here, Lucinda said. Park had the grace to look slightly abashed. My apologies. I meant no offense. Everyone means no offense. And yet, the tension stretched. Kang-Dae's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. If you'll excuse us, he said to Park, taking Lucinda's elbow and steering her toward a quiet corner. What was that? What was what? Me not pretending it's fine to be discussed like I'm not even human. Park was complimenting you. Park was being condescending. There's a difference. She pulled away from his grip. I know what I am here. I'm useful. I'm your asset. But don't expect me to smile and nod while people treat me like I'm some exotic curiosity you've brought back from your travels. Kang-Dae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. You think I don't notice? You think I don't see the looks, hear the comments? Then why bring me? Because I needed you. He stepped closer, and Lucinda's breath caught. And because, despite everything, you're the only person in this entire city I can trust to tell me the truth. The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Before Lucinda could process it, Mrs. Cho appeared with another guest, and the moment shattered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. By the time they returned to the apartment, Lucinda was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. She headed straight for her room, but Kang-Dae's voice stopped her. Lucinda. She turned. He stood by the window, his profile sharp against the city lights. I know this isn't easy. Being here, being watched constantly, being judged for things you can't control. He paused. But you've handled it with more grace than anyone I know, including me. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was acknowledgement, and something in Lucinda's chest loosened. Is this the part where you tell me it gets easier? No. This is the part where I tell you I understand that it won't. And that I'm sorry you have to go through it. Lucinda nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She went to her room and closed the door, leaning against it as something she couldn't name settled over her. She was in trouble, and not the kind that could be solved with code or caution. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Jae-sung had been arrested in New York. The evidence against him included the files Lucinda had helped steal, carefully leaked to the right prosecutors through untraceable channels. He'll be in prison for the rest of his life, Kang-Dae said, scrolling through his messages. His territory is being divided among his rivals, several of whom are now deeply in my debt. So you won. Congratulations. He looked up. We won. This wouldn't have happened without you. I didn't have a choice. No. But you exceeded expectations anyway. That counts for something. He set his phone down. Your debt is paid, Lucinda. You're free to return to New York whenever you want. The words should have been relief. Instead, they felt like a door closing. Lucinda realized with uncomfortable clarity that she'd gotten used to this, the challenges, the danger, even Kang-Dae's constant presence. What if I don't want to leave yet? Kang-Dae's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Then I would ask why. That was the question, wasn't it? Lucinda didn't have a good answer. Or rather, she had answers she wasn't ready to examine too closely. I'm useful here. You said so yourself. You're also under constant scrutiny and occasional hostility. That's not a life. Neither is going back to scraping by in New York, wondering when the next crisis will hit. She moved closer, surprising herself with her boldness. I like the work. I like solving problems that actually matter. And I like. She stopped, but the unfinished sentence hung between them. You like what? Kang-Dae asked quietly. I like that you don't treat me like I'm fragile. You're ruthless and demanding, but you're honest. I can work with that. And that's all it is? Work. The question made her pulse jump. What else would it be? He studied her for a long moment, and Lucinda had the unnerving sense that he could see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. I don't know, he said finally. But I think we should both be careful about finding out. Lucinda stayed. Not because Kang-Dae asked her to, but because leaving felt like giving up on something she couldn't quite name. They fell into a new routine. Mornings were spent analyzing data, afternoons in meetings, evenings debriefing over dinner that gradually became less about work and more about everything else. Kang-Dae talked about growing up in Seoul, about his father's expectations and his own carefully hidden ambitions. Lucinda shared stories about her mother, about growing up in Brooklyn, about feeling caught between worlds even before she'd set foot in Korea. The isolation didn't disappear, but it became bearable. Kang-Dae started teaching her Korean, basic phrases at first, then more complex constructions. She was terrible at it, stumbling over pronunciations that made him wince. "You sound like you're trying to strangle the words," he said one evening after she'd butchered a greeting for the third time. "Maybe I am. These tones are impossible. They're logical. You just need to stop approaching them like English." He moved closer, and Lucinda became acutely aware of the space between them. "Try again." Slowly. She did, and this time she got it mostly right. The pleased surprise on his face was worth all the previous failures. But the careful distance they maintained was becoming harder to navigate. Lucinda caught herself noticing things she shouldn't, the way Kang-Dae's focus sharpened when he was solving a problem, the rare moments when his controlled expression cracked into something almost vulnerable, the precise way he moved through space like violence held carefully in check. She told herself it didn't mean anything. That proximity and dependence were creating false intimacy. That what she felt was gratitude, not attraction, and certainly not anything deeper. Then came the night that shattered all her carefully constructed rationalizations. They were in Busan for a meeting with a shipping magnate who controlled half the port operations. The man was paranoid, insisting on meeting at his private compound outside the city. By the time negotiations concluded, it was past midnight and the roads were treacherous with rain. "We'll stay here tonight," the magnate offered. "I have guest accommodations. Safer than driving in this weather." Kang-Dae accepted, and they were shown to a wing of the compound that was all dark wood and traditional architecture. The manager bowed apologetically as he opened a door. "I apologize. We only have one room available. There was a scheduling error." "It's fine," Kang-Dae said before Lucinda could protest. The room was beautiful in the way traditional hammocks were beautiful, low furniture, sleeping mats laid out on heated floors, paper screens filtering the light, and a single sleeping space. "I'll take the floor," Lucinda said immediately. "Don't be ridiculous. The bed is large enough." "Kang-Dae, we're both adults." His tone was carefully neutral. "And we're both exhausted. This doesn't have to be complicated." But it was already complicated, and they both knew it. They prepared for bed in careful silence. Lucinda changed in the bathroom, emerging in the sleep clothes provided by their host. When she returned, Kang-Dae was already lying on his side of the bed, his back to the center. She lay down, maintaining as much distance as the space allowed. The rain drummed against the roof, and somewhere in the compound, a wind chime sang out in a regular rhythm. Sleep should have come easily. Instead, Lucinda lay awake, hyper-aware of Kang-Dae's breathing, of the warmth radiating from his body, of how small the distance between them really was. "You're not sleeping," he said quietly. "Neither are you." Silence stretched. "Then, are you afraid of me?" The question surprised her. "Should I be?" "Most people are. At least a little." Lucinda considered this. She should be afraid. Kang-Dae was dangerous in every way that mattered. But fear wasn't what kept her awake. "I'm afraid of what happens when I stop being useful," she said finally. "When the debt is paid and the work runs out. I'm afraid of going back to invisible irrelevance." "You were never irrelevant. You didn't know I existed 6 weeks ago. And now I can't imagine my operation without you." He shifted, turning toward her though she couldn't see his face in the darkness. "You made yourself indispensable. That's not nothing. Is that what this is?" Professional appreciation. The question hung in the air, dangerous and inevitable. When Kang-Dae spoke, his voice was rough. "You know it isn't." Lucinda's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then what is it?" "A complication I didn't plan for. A variable I can't control." A pause. "Something I shouldn't want but can't seem to stop wanting." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Lucinda knew she should let it go, should reinforce the boundaries they'd worked so hard to maintain. Instead, she found herself asking, "What do you want? Right now?" "To close this distance." To stop pretending I haven't been thinking about you in ways that have nothing to do with business. His voice dropped. But I won't. Because you're vulnerable here, and I'm the reason for that vulnerability. Taking advantage would make me no different from every other man who's used power to take what he wants. Something in Lucinda's chest cracked open. She'd expected many things from Kang-Dae, but this kind of restraint, this awareness of the power imbalance between them, that was unexpected. What if it's not about taking advantage? She asked quietly. What if I want? Don't. The word was almost harsh. Don't make this decision tonight, in the dark, when we're both exhausted and the situation is intimate. If you still feel this way in the clear light of day, when you've had time to think about what it would mean, then we'll talk. He turned away again, ending the conversation, but his words echoed in the space between them. Lucinda lay awake for a long time, thinking about power and choice, about wanting and fear, about how thoroughly this man had appended every assumption she'd had about her life and herself. When she finally slept, it was fitful and full of dreams she couldn't quite remember. Morning came gray and cool, the rain reduced to a soft mist. They drove back to Seoul in near silence, the nighttime conversation hanging between them like something tangible. The day's meetings were routine, but Lucinda found her attention drifting. She kept replaying Kang-Dae's words, examining them from different angles. The restraint he'd shown, the respect implicit in his refusal, it meant something. Maybe everything. That evening, back at the apartment, she found him on the balcony. Seoul glittered below, millions of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to map. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he was aware of her presence. I've been thinking about last night, she said. So have I. You were right. About not making that decision in the dark when everything felt heightened. She moved to stand beside him. But I've thought about it all day. In the clear light. With full understanding of what it would mean. Now he turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. And I still want, she stopped, trying to find the right words. I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's real or if it's just proximity and adrenaline and trauma bonding or whatever psychological term explains why people in intense situations develop feelings for each other. But I know I've never met anyone like you. I know working with you makes me feel capable in ways I never imagined. And I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way that has nothing to do with my skin color or my otherness or any of the things everyone else fixates on. Kang-Dae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. I need you to understand what you'd be choosing. Not just me, but this life. The danger, the scrutiny, the constant judgment from people who will never accept you. It won't get easier. And I can't promise to always protect you from it. I know. I also need you to know that I'm not good at this. At feelings, at relationships, at anything that requires vulnerability. I've spent my entire life learning to control every variable, and you are completely outside that control. It terrifies me. The admission, coming from a man like Kang-Dae, was extraordinary. Lucinda found herself smiling despite everything. Good. I'd hate to be the only one who's terrified. Something shifted in his expression, the careful control fracturing to reveal something warmer underneath. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hand. Last chance to change your mind, he said quietly. I won't. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't desperate or rough or overwhelming. It was careful, almost tentative, like he was afraid she might break or disappear. Lucinda leaned into it, her hands finding his shoulders, and felt the tension in his body gradually ease. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured. Probably. It will complicate everything. It already has. And you're sure you want this? Want me? Instead of answering, Lucinda kissed him again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. They moved inside slowly, neither quite willing to break contact. The apartment felt different suddenly, less like a sterile space and more like somewhere they both belonged. When they reached Kang-Dae's room, he paused. We don't have to. I know. But I want to. What followed was quiet and intense and tender in ways that surprised them both. There was no rush, no desperation, just a slow exploration of boundaries being redrawn and walls coming down. Kang-Dae was careful with her, attentive in a way that spoke of genuine care rather than practiced technique. And Lucinda found herself responding to him with a vulnerability she'd never allowed herself before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. "I should probably tell you," Lucinda said eventually, "that I have no idea what I'm doing." "In general or specifically?" "Both. This isn't something I'm good at. The relationship thing. I always mess it up. That makes two of us." Kang-Dae's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. "But maybe we can figure it out together." "Is that what this is? A relationship?" "I don't know what else to call it." Lucinda thought about that. About how thoroughly her life had changed, about the impossibility of what they were attempting, and about how, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. "My mother would lose her mind if she knew where I was," she said. "What I'm doing? Who I'm with? Would she disapprove?" "I think she'd be terrified. And probably a little impressed. She always said I was too cautious, that I played things too safe." "You destroyed $60 million of my records." "I wouldn't call that cautious. That was an accident. The best things often are." They lapsed into silence again. Outside, Seoul hummed with endless life. Inside, in the quiet darkness, they were just two people trying to figure out if what they'd found was real or just a beautiful accident. The next weeks unfolded with a new kind of tension, not the careful distance they'd maintained before, but an awareness that colored every interaction. They were professional in public, but in private, the walls came down. Kang-Dae taught Lucinda more Korean, though the lessons often devolved into laughter when she butchered pronunciations. She showed him American movies he'd never seen, and they argued over plot holes and character motivations with surprising intensity. But the outside world didn't change just because their relationship had. The scrutiny continued, and if anything, it intensified as people began to notice the subtle shifts between them. Mrs. Cho cornered Lucinda at another event, her eyes shrewd. "You and Kang-Dae. There's something different. We work well together." "That's not what I mean, dear." She leaned closer. "I've known that boy since he was young. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. I hope you know what you're doing." "I don't," Lucinda admitted. "But I'm trying to figure it out." Mrs. Cho studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "Honesty. How refreshing. Perhaps you're exactly what he needs." Not everyone was so accepting. There were whispers, sidelong glances, comments that cut even when delivered with smiles. Park Se-jin pulled Kang-Dae aside after a meeting, his concern evident. "People are talking," he said, and though Lucinda couldn't hear the full conversation, she caught enough to understand the warning. When she asked Kang-Dae about it later, he was dismissive. "Park worries too much." "About what?" "About perception. About how my personal life might affect my professional standing." He pulled her close. "I don't care what people think." "You should. This is your world, your reputation. And you're part of that world now. People can adjust or they can find themselves on the outside. I'm done pretending that what I want doesn't matter." The fierceness in his voice made something warm bloom in Lucinda's chest. But she couldn't shake the worry that his loyalty to her might cost him more than he was willing to admit. The crisis came 2 months after their relationship began. A rival faction, threatened by Kang-Dae's growing influence, decided to strike where they perceived weakness. Lucinda was leaving a cafe in Gangnam when the car pulled up. 3 men emerged, moving with purpose. She knew immediately what was happening and ran, but they were faster. She woke in a warehouse, her head throbbing. The men who'd taken her stood nearby, speaking in rapid Korean. One of them made a call, and she heard Kang-Dae's name. They were using her as leverage. The realization made her stomach turn. This was exactly what she'd feared, becoming a liability, a tool to be used against him. When Kang-Dae arrived 2 hours later, his expression was terrifying in its blankness. The negotiations were conducted in Korean, but Lucinda caught enough to understand. They wanted territory, concessions, money. And they wanted Kang-Dae to acknowledge his weakness publicly. "No," she said in English, drawing everyone's attention. Don't give them anything because of me. One of the men backhanded her casually, and Lucinda tasted blood. The blank expression on Kang-Dae's face cracked, revealing something cold and lethal. What happened next was too fast to follow clearly. Violence erupted with surgical precision. Kang-Dae moved like he'd been trained for exactly this, and in minutes, the situation was reversed. The men who'd taken her were on the ground, subdued by people who'd apparently been waiting for his signal. Kang-Dae cut through the ropes binding her, his hands gentle despite the fury still evident in his eyes. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Kang-Dae, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. This isn't your fault. He pulled her against him, and she felt the tension vibrating through his body. This is mine. For thinking they wouldn't target you. For being too visible about what you mean to me. What do I mean to you? He pulled back enough to look at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. Everything. You mean everything. The drive back to the apartment was silent. Once inside, Kang-Dae's control finally broke. He paced like a caged animal, fury and fear warring across his face. This can't happen again. We need better security, different protocols. Kang-Dae. Lucinda caught his hand, forcing him to stop. Look at me. He did, and she saw the fear underneath the anger. Fear for her. Fear of what could have happened. I knew the risks, she said quietly. When I chose you, I knew it wouldn't be safe. But I chose it anyway because you're worth it. We're worth it. Even if it puts you in danger? Even then. She pulled him closer. I'm not fragile. I'm not helpless. And I'm not going anywhere. Something in his expression softened. He pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair, and she felt the careful control he maintained so ruthlessly finally crack. They held each other in the quiet apartment, two people who'd found something unexpected in the middle of chaos and danger, and Lucinda knew that whatever challenges came next, they would face them together. The months that followed weren't easy. The faction that had targeted Lucinda was dismantled, but others took notice. The scrutiny intensified, and with it came pressure from people who thought Kang-Dae was making himself vulnerable. But something had shifted. Kang-Dae stopped hiding their relationship. He introduced Lucinda as his partner, not his consultant, and the people who couldn't accept it found themselves on the outside. It cost him some alliances, but it also revealed who his true supporters were. Park Se-jin, surprisingly, was one of them. You're either the bravest man I know or the most foolish, he told Kang-Dae at a meeting where Lucinda sat openly at his side. But I respect consistency. And she's proven herself useful enough that the trade-off makes sense. I'm not a trade-off, Lucinda said sharply. Park grinned. No. You're an asset who happens to be sleeping with the boss. Even better. Kang-Dae's expression darkened, but Lucinda touched his hand. He's not wrong. And I'd rather have honest acknowledgement than polite fiction. The acceptance, when it came, was grudging and incomplete. But it was enough. Lucinda built her own reputation, her own network of contacts who valued her skills regardless of her relationship with Kang-Dae. She was still conspicuous, still judged more harshly than others, but she learned to navigate it. Mrs. Cho became an unexpected ally, introducing Lucinda to other powerful women who operated in Seoul's shadows. They were intrigued by her uniqueness, and some genuinely welcomed her insights. 6 months after their relationship began, Lucinda woke to find Kang-Dae already up, standing by the window with his coffee. The early morning light cast him in silhouette, and she took a moment to simply look at him. You're staring, he said without turning. Just appreciating the view. He smiled, and she saw again how much he'd changed. The careful control was still there, but it no longer felt like armor. Just competence. I've been thinking, he said. About the future. About what we're building here. And I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not convenient or useful or any of the clinical terms I used to use. He stopped, struggling with words he'd never been good at. You're home. In a way nothing else has ever been. Lucinda crossed to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. You're sentimental in the mornings. Only with you. He turned in her embrace. I'm serious, Lucinda. I want this to work. Whatever it takes. It already is working. Messy and complicated and sometimes terrifying, but working. You're not afraid? Of this, of US, of what it means. She thought about that. About the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate and trapped and willing to do anything to save her mother. About the woman she was now, stronger, more confident, more willing to take risks. I'm terrified, she admitted. But not of you. Of losing this. Of going back to who I was before. You could never go back. You've changed too much. So have you. He kissed her then, soft and unhurried, and in the quiet morning light, with Seoul waking up around them, Lucinda let herself believe that maybe, despite everything, they'd found something real. Something worth all the complications and challenges and risks. It wasn't perfect. They still argued, still struggled with cultural differences and power dynamics and the constant pressure from the outside world. But they learned to navigate it together, finding a rhythm that worked for them. And when the hard days came, when the scrutiny became too much or the danger too close, they had each other. That was enough. It had to be enough. One evening, a year after Lucinda had first arrived in Seoul, she stood on the balcony with Kang-Dae. The city stretched out before them, endless and alive. Do you ever miss New York? He asked. Sometimes. I miss my mother, even though she's getting better care here than she ever could have there. I miss the anonymity. She leaned against him. But I don't miss the person I was there. Always playing it safe, always invisible. You were never invisible. Just unseen. Is there a difference? Yes. Invisible means you're not there. Unseen means people are choosing not to look. He tilted her chin up. I see you. All of you. And I'm not looking away. Promise? Promise. They kissed as the city lights flickered on around them, two people who'd found each other through chaos and choice and one enormous mistake. It wasn't the ending Lucinda would have chosen for herself a year ago. But standing there in Kang-Dae's arms with Seoul's endless possibilities spread out before them, she realized it was exactly the beginning she needed. The future was uncertain, dangerous, full of challenges she couldn't anticipate. But for the first time in her life, Lucinda wasn't afraid of that uncertainty. She had her skills, her strength, and someone who chose to see her. That was enough. That was everything.